Auntie Ricochet was speaking of the other night, that one of the ways in which we can help ourselves when I think I'm louder than Ricochet. Okay, how's that? Is that still too strong? We'll turn it down. Okay. One of the ways that can help us when we're going through difficult times, or if our society is just in difficult times, is to try to notice when we're being dragged forward or back in our mind. You know, so we're constantly thinking about the future, or we're constantly being pulled towards the past. And so we don't really notice what's going on now. And so that can help us just focus on, you know, our lives as opposed to all of our worries about our lives. Because worries are generally in the future. We're worried about something happening or not happening. Or we're worried about something we've done or didn't do. So it's sort of not what's happening now. And so that can help us by just kind of trying to spend more of our mental time in the present, can keep us from exhausting ourselves with traveling to the future and to the past all the time. It can also keep us from spending a whole lot of mental energy on, what do we call it, ruminating over something as opposed to problem solving. You know, worrying and problem solving are not the same thing. You know, worrying is more like wishing that something was different than it is. Whereas problem solving is really looking at a situation and going, can I do something about this? Can I do something about this? Each part of it. Worrying is about all those parts that we can't do anything about, so there's sort of no point in worrying. So once we assess something is not something we can change, then we can kind of let go of worrying about it. I mean, it's a process, not, you know, it takes a little practice to do that. But one of the things that we can do when we catch ourselves just going again over and over and over and over about something that's not happening now is just bring our attention to what is happening now. And so an easy way to do that is to bring your attention to, say, what's going on in the body. And that just brings you to this moment. So it's nice to get started with class just by bringing your attention to your body sitting here in order to bring your mind into this room instead of the busyness of getting here or whatever planning you have for later. So if you just take a moment to bring your attention inward to your own body, and perhaps you can notice the sensation of the floor against your feet, or the chair or the cushion against your legs, and maybe the temperature in the room against your skin. And you might be aware of the sounds of voices coming from the room next door. The sound of the air conditioner. But you can just check in with your body, see how it's doing. And if you take a few belly breaths, I can relax any spots of tension. Now just remember the reason that you came here this evening. And whatever that reason is, try to set a positive intention to use your time well. So now we're going to recite our refuge prayer. So it's on page 98. This course, we're in the 11th course out of a series of 13 classes. But we actually have 3 left because I'm not done them in order. Just to make it really confusing. But anyway, so generally we wouldn't recite the refuge prayer for this class at the beginning of this class, in the early modules, because people haven't been exposed to any of the teachings. It seems a little ridiculous to say refuge bodhicitta when you don't know what the words mean and when you're not a Buddhist and all that stuff. But some of us who are here, who are attending, do kind of identify with being Buddhist. So for their sake, we're going to recite it. And what the refuge prayer is about is really just about reminding ourselves that we found a path or a teaching that resonates with us, that is trying to guide us to help us with finding peace of mind. So refuge is we call it, it's a safe haven, but it's also a reliance on teachings that lead us in a way that we're not super familiar with. That if we're left to our own devices, we haven't done such a great job in finding peace for our mind. So this, we found a teaching that describes methods with which we might do better, become more skillful. So ultimately, however, the refuge is really in the internalization of new habits of mind. So eventually we come to rely more and more on our own inner wisdom. I mean, maybe after a few countless eons, but, you have to start somewhere. Okay, so we say this verse 3 times. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So this is the last night of this module, and it's called Transforming Suffering. No, it's not.
Wrong class. Wrong class.
I'll take a sip of water and start over.
In a way.
Yes, it is. That's why I always get mixed up. It's transforming problems, otherwise known as suffering, apparently, in my mind. So one of the main aspects of this teaching is about how even our habit of labeling people or events or situations or circumstances as problems is a problem for our mind. That because we imbue the word problem with a connotation that is unpleasant, that we see as, like it's naturally difficult. That's why we use the word problem. That we start the mental process of aversion, where we don't want it. And that causes a tension right away between whatever it is or whoever it is in our mind. If we try to approach things without that kind of negative label, we might find that it gives it more space. We can find a little more space around it to just handle it rather than see it as something that must go away. And the sooner the better. So, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's the spiritual director of these centers, likes to refer to the practice as trying to develop our minds to the point where we see things as what we used to call problems, and we could still call them problems, but that we interpret those things as opportunities to develop our good qualities, opportunities to be of help to others, and to be so delighted. It's no different than being offered, ice cream or chocolate cake or a weekend trip to wherever. If you're on the beach, then it's to the mountains. So, since we're always happier somewhere else. Well, this obviously takes some mind training. So that's what this course has been all about, is how do we just look at how we've already trained our mind. Those are our mental habits, like seeing situations that we find challenging as a problem that has to be stopped, and not see the good qualities of every situation. So we started, the verses, it's on page 161. So these are the 8 verses of mind training. This is contained within a practice in this prayer book, but so the first verse, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. So this approach is looking at all people as a wish-fulfilling jewel. So what did that get at? How is this verse trying to inform us?
No, you go.
Politeness doesn't work in volleyball, and it doesn't work. Jump in.
I was just gonna say, if you meet someone and you see them as special, either way.
Either way, what? Special.
Well, if you can see anyone, any living being, whether it's an ant or a person.
Well, they're both people, according to Buddhism,
Right.
just to make it difficult.
Right. And if you see them as precious, then you really want to care for them.
Well, that's certainly part of the attitude. What is this wish-fulfilling jewel part? Yes, Meg.
Well, basically, people with whom we have good relationships and are nice, that's fine, but it doesn't give us as much opportunity to develop mind. People who are difficult situations or people who produce difficulties for us give us opportunity to develop, patience, all kinds of, generosity, all the parameters.
Right, so all of our good qualities, this is that opportunity to start looking at where do our good qualities come from? And recognizing our good qualities don't come from situations or people that we like, that always agree with us, that like to do the same things we do, that support us in all activities, that our good qualities actually are cultivated when things are difficult, when someone needs something from us, or when a situation challenges us, challenges our patience, challenges us, our desire to give, Have you ever, seen someone have that look of need on their face and there's a part of you that wants to close your office door? These are the types of conditions that help us stretch our capacity, for our good qualities. So most of the things that we think about, like if we imagine ourselves on our deathbed and we're thinking about how we want to be remembered, those qualities are the kinds of qualities that difficult situations helped us develop. It's not the easy stuff. It's not the stuff that just comes naturally because we match in preference in things. So this is one way to reframe situations that we sort of habitually label as problems or difficult as an opportunity. That this is how I can grow. Oh, I'm delighted that this challenge has arisen because now I can really see, an opportunity for me to be able to help or to just become a little less impatient or become more generous or become kinder or maybe even develop a new, some knowledge because you're learning something new. So that's the first verse. Yep.
Well, it just came to my mind that, we actually often subject ourselves to difficulties to obtain something. For example, if we want to get PhD, we have to do a lot of work, and suffer maybe sleepless nights, anxiety, all kinds of things. But we see a goal, we see
Right.
kind of, the end result. Whereas with developing our mind, we basically are never taught as children that, that's what we should be doing. So we, as adults, also don't see it until somebody maybe gives us class or points out that it's a good idea, maybe.
Well, and that's why we need, this is why we turn to people who seem to have mastered something in a way that we have not. So, yes, so it is one of the benefits that they talk about of suffering is that usually there's some positive sides to suffering. Like you might like to get your PhD. It's not easy to get your PhD. It's not easy to learn new skills. It's not easy to master things. And so we have to kind of rise up to the occasion. And it's just no different with, like our external goals or our materialistic goals than with our spiritual goals or the kind of person we want to be. It takes challenges for us to get there. Otherwise, we just pretty much stay in the same place. The second verse, when in the company of others, I shall always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others dear and supreme. What is this verse getting at? Humility, and humility implies what?
Not having self-cherishing.
Yeah.
Putting others first,
Hmm?
putting the other person
And you
first.
will feel superior than others.
Right, so what does that kind of say? I'm sorry?
You lessen your ego?
Well, yeah, all of those things, but what is it informing us? what is the suggestion here?
They are our teachers.
They are our teachers.
You know.
Because it's not saying we're equal to others. It's although we are. I mean, it does say, you know, that's the teaching. This is saying if we're in a group of people and we see ourselves as the lowest of all, that gives us the opportunity to learn from everyone. And this is another way in which others are wish-fulfilling jewels. But if we walk into a room, a group of people, and we see ourselves as superior to everybody else, we're not likely to learn from them. So again, it's just our, you know, our habitual happy, and we have to find out what they are. I mean, they're not the same for everybody. There's some themes, perhaps, like we all want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. That's a sort of commonality we all have. But the way we interpret that is different slightly. So often when we walk into a room of people, one of our habits is to go to, what's in it for me? What can I get out of these people? You know, why should I be here? You know? It's like when we're planning something, like if someone says, oh, you want to come with me to blah, blah, blah. One of the things we evaluate is what's in it for me? Why would I want to go? And so we kind of have that attitude, that habit. Whenever we enter any situation, we're kind of looking for what's in it for me. So with work, what's in it for us? Sometimes it's prestige. Sometimes, but it's like usually a paycheck at least. That's our livelihood. That's how we support ourselves. So we're willing to do things in that environment that we might not be willing to do if there's no paycheck involved. Like what? Be kind. What else? But what else do we often do, or that is often demanded of us in a work environment that perhaps we don't have to deal with our friends? Patience.
Treat others equally or be considerate.
Actually, it's sort of different. Depends on what role you're in. If you're the boss, it's different. Yeah.
Expectations?
Yep, you have expectations, but often you have, in particular at work, you have others' expectations of you. And others feel like they have the right to have expectations of you. And so they may demand things in ways that you would prefer that they demand it differently. But because they have the power over you, and if they're in that kind of mode of thinking that they have power over as opposed to power with, we will tolerate being told what to do in ways that we would not tolerate if our friends use that same tone of voice with us, because there's something in it for us. So I'm just bringing that up because we need to, when we're starting to become more self-aware about what's going on in our minds, we often think, oh, I can't do that. But we often do that in certain situations. We're incredibly tolerant in workplace situations when our paycheck depends on it. So we have the capacity to do it if we feel like the reason is sufficient to do it. And so this gets back to what I frequently talk about, is we need to come up with our own reasoning why we want to develop our good qualities, why we want to expand on them. Because if we don't have any motivation to do it, then we're probably not going to do it. So if we don't see, well, I really want to develop kindness because I want to be a good model for my children. because I think the world's an easier place to live in if people are kind to each other, because I want to be thought of as a kind person. I like that quality in others, so I would also like to have that.
In some situations like work, this is often superficial only.
It may be
It's not
superficial,
internal, you know, like
but it may be
you-
superficial,
No,
but it doesn't mean you're not doing it.
right, but it's,
You know?
it's external kind of. People will smile or and then inside they say, I hate this bee or something like that. I mean, I've heard this so many times.
Oh, of course.
At work, you know.
We do that in all avenues of our life.
Right.
You know, we fake it. But the reality is, what it shows us is we do actually have the ability to refrain from doing something if it's going to keep us from being fired. This is just illustrates that we can do things that perhaps we don't think we can do. An awful lot of the time, when we're up against our own mind, we think we can't do anything about it. I can't stop myself from being angry. I can't stop myself from this or that. And the Buddha just tries to illustrate how it's true that we're somewhat out of control from our habit energy. We're so well trained. Sometimes we're really well trained in tolerating abusive behavior because we've been habituated to that. Sometimes we are, we all have family dynamics. I don't know, my house, everybody had certain rights above others, the parents having the most rights, and, my dad certainly had certain rights over my mom. And the children definitely, so there's all these things you learn. So we have to look at, am I responding in a habitual way because I'm still playing out a role that no longer fits? So these are just things to be aware of, but it shows you how incredibly flexible our minds are. We can learn, we are incredibly adaptable. And so what these teachings help us learn how to do is adapt ourselves in the direction we want to go, as opposed to wherever we learn these habits.
But without leaving the roles, really.
I'm sorry?
Without leaving the roles, I'm thinking.
Without leaving the roles, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, we'll play roles no matter what.
But yeah, because we are in different roles.
In different roles, at different moments.
Yes, but what we may want to question is, am I still playing a role that I'm no longer actually in? So often children will continue playing the role of children. Every family visit, even though they're now 40. So it's just, or you play sibling roles. How many people turn into these children that they can't, that they can't believe they are when they're back in their family circle? It's like the same conversations you had as teenagers. It's kind of a shock. But the point of this isn't so much about dissecting everything down. It's more of just recognizing how trainable we are. And that a lot of what we're doing now is habit energy. And it's pushing us. We just follow our habit energy because it rises so quickly. That's why we call it habit energy, And when it may not be serving our purposes anymore. So the habit of looking at challenging situations as problems is one of those ways in which we might be adding a layer of suffering onto something that doesn't need to be there. Just because something is challenging or new to us or unexpected or whatever doesn't mean it's something that has to work out badly. Or, if it doesn't get fixed, is going to work out badly. Whatever we're imbuing the word problem with, that's one of the things we want to look at, is in our own minds, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by a problem? And some of us imbue it with a lot of heaviness. It's sort of like, oh, do I really have to deal with this? And then right there, we put an obstacle in front of us that makes it even harder to deal with it. So those mindsets get in our way. Then we may have the mindset that says, I can't handle this. Or, I don't know what I'm doing and that's a bad thing. So we have a lot of self-doubt that might arise. Or I just simply don't want to deal with it. Rinpoche was talking about this the other night. The obstacle that arises just from the resistance to what is. Instead of accepting that this is what it is, we keep wanting to have it not be that. And then that becomes a whole secondary thing we're dealing with. If you want to say something.
Yeah, as far as craving and aversion,
Mm-hmm.
how do you having problems, is that like not regarding having problems and having an aversion? So you have a
Problems
problem-
usually have a connotation that leads us to aversion.
So then why would they be problems? If we're trying to get, if we're going to work on not having an aversion, why is that problem a problem?
If we're working on not having aversion, then you don't want to see a problem as a problem. If you're just the way you normally are, generally we respond to problems with aversion. We want it to go away. So that's the part of the training. If you're already there with something, then you don't have to worry about that one. I'm not sure I'm understanding.
No, you're right. I'm saying the way you look at it, the way I'm looking at it, the idea is to have neither. If you're okay with the things as they are, whether they're in the
Right.
camp or the
Equanimity.
camp.
Right.
So when it comes to a problem, it seems like that it seems like you have an aversion to that situation being that way.
Yes, that's right. And that's what we want to look at. It's how we imbue situations by the very names we give them. So one start is to see things as opportunities instead of problems. But just as, like we talked about before, that soon can just be another word for problem. So that's not enough. You have to actually change the way we respond to things that we normally call problems.
But for now, before it changes the connotation, opportunity kind of makes it lighter.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
kind of, okay, I can deal with it. Whereas problem is like, I want to remove myself or I want to control it and I cannot, so I'm pushing, harder and harder and go crazy
Exactly.
because of this.
So this is just one of those little things you do to kind of help you get started. First of all, it's like a mindfulness bill. Oh yeah, that's right. I don't want to see everything that comes up as a problem. So I want to see, where's the opportunity in this? This is like a mind game because we're talking about training the mind. We're already trained in a particular direction. And what we're trying to do is interrupt that and let something else happen. And also to recognize that just labeling something with a negative label starts the suffering process. We decided this situation is something we'd like to avoid before we've even really examined it. As soon as we label it, because of the connotations or the way we've imbued that label, we've added a layer of suffering. It can be a very small layer, maybe just that, edge of irritation. But that edge of irritation, if you do it again and again and again, by the end of the day, you're angry. You're not just irritated anymore. So it's recognizing that this is something we actually can change. We can't change the external thing that's happening, but the way we respond to it can really change how our day unfolds, which, you know, becomes our week, which becomes our month, which becomes our year.
But how to slow down that
You
gap?
can't, well, this is where you just have to pause, because this is what habit energy does. It is just pushing us to, you know, it just arises. Now, we are so habituated to it, we don't have to think about it, it's just there. So what we start with is seeing it, oh, there it is. And then we step back. We mentally just step back. You know, well, wait a minute. Maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's an opportunity. We give ourselves a pep talk. You know, we just step back for a moment and try to look at whatever it is with fresh eyes. Not with, you know, the dark sunglasses on. Or the, you know.
When you need to have your, like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need your basic needs met. Without that, can you really
Talk to people in other countries.
Yeah, I can imagine, but still, it's an issue where, I mean.
Do you know that Maslow, I did a graduate paper on Maslow's self-actualization, and it actually didn't hold up to research, which I found very interesting. So, we have to question our belief systems. You know, like, because they're fluid. So this idea of having this hierarchy of needs or self-actualization, if we buy into a particular belief, then we're not dealing with just what is. Let's just look at what is and not take it into some big, massive map of our world. Because it may not fit so easily into it. Yes, we have needs. There's no question. This is why the Buddha talks about a precious human rebirth. Because not everyone has one. Because if your situation is so harsh that all you can do is try to survive, you don't have time for a spiritual path. You may be fortunate in that you're in a family situation where people do rely on higher power or on God or Buddha, and that helps give you a certain feeling of not being alone. But you don't have a lot of time, leisure time to say, sit around and meditate and reflect.
However, that also depends how well developed you are.
Yeah,
Buddha
absolutely.
left everything, had nothing, and he was fine.
Well, this was
And
where I
many
was going
others-
with that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Many others.
this is the idea, is that this is what I meant by it's fluid. So when we don't have a lot of skills with our mind training, not having our physical needs met, our safety needs met, our whatever, all the needs that we can think of met, it is very difficult for us to not have our minds clouded by those things. But someone who's really worked on training the mind, who really understands that external conditions do not dictate or don't have to dictate our peace of mind, are not troubled by their external environment. But this, and so they, you know, and we've all met people who seem to be in really difficult situations, but yet they seem to still be light. You know, they have a lightness to them. It's not that they minimize the difficulties, it just doesn't seem to devastate them. You know, you wonder, how do they get up in the morning? How do they face, you know, this, that, and the other? And, you know, what Buddhism would say is that they've had other lifetimes of practice where they brought with them a resilience that comes from training the mind. Now, the mind and heart, for those of you who are new here, you know, are the same word. So we're not making a distinction between emotion and reasoning. They're all states of mind. So it is possible to have, peace of mind in spite of really difficult situations. It's not so easy though. And most people who are in very difficult situations are just working at dealing with that. Both the way in which they deal with it is affected by their habits of mind. And so children, when you see, you know how children in the same family aren't necessarily the same people? They have different habits of mind, so some people, are able to roll with things in a different way than other family members are. And they're living in the same circumstances, but their minds are different. Their habits of mind are different. And so that's what can help. Okay, so one thing that can help is looking at others as something, there's something in it for you. That others are actually the source of all of our wish-fulfilling things. That's what the first verse is trying to help us consider the possibility of. The second verse is this idea that everybody can teach us something. There's no reason to ever see ourselves as superior to others. We might be confident that we have skills that are stronger than someone else's skill in that task, and that's fine, but that doesn't make you superior to them just because you have a skill that they don't have. Now the third verse is about vigilant the moment a delusion arises in my mind or appears in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall confront and avert it without delay. So this is an advanced practice because this is the 11th module. So these are like aspirational prayers. But this idea is that once we've developed the habit through watching our mind, what am I thinking? What's going on here? We start to see when we jump to conclusions. Where I've decided this is going to be a problem or this person is difficult, and so let me step back a moment and not allow that. What would you call it, preconceived notion to dictate my response because it's not a skillful starting point. If we've already decided someone's difficult, we can't learn anything from them, or they're just idiots, or that, gee, make my day by not showing up, please, then there's not a whole lot we can do with that next moment. Because we've already decided it's going to be difficult, we don't want it, we have aversion. So we want to spot when we've got that attitude, So you walk into a party and you go, oh, I can't believe they came. You want to notice that you've just had that thought. And give yourself a little mental distance so that you can perhaps counter that thought, oh, I don't want to start off that way, I don't want to assume anything. And why would I think I'm right? What does that say about me that I have that thought? Maybe I should work on me, not so much try to make them go away.
I love the analogy that Rinpoche made about, what is it that he couldn't find that word either, that when your cells attack your body.
Autoimmune
Right,
disease.
it's like weird. It's like,
Yeah.
It was perfect. That was like, he's so right.
Yeah, it's so, often it's really amazing. It's sort of like, it's like the thing about anger, it's like, drinking poison hoping the other person will die. Who's suffering when you're angry? You are. So why do we think that's such a powerful state of mind? And that it's going to get us what we want. It might help us get even, so to speak. But it actually doesn't, I mean, as long as we have that anger, we're unhappy. And it gets in the way, you know, it's sort of like, if you assume you're going to have a bad time at an event, what are the odds? You know? Whereas if we can keep our hearts open, our mind open, and have no expectation, then who knows what might arise. But we have to test that out. Did you have your hand?
Huh?
I thought you had. No, yeah, I could say it was a hair in my eye, but I don't know. It's those floaters, though. So whenever I see beings, this is 4, whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear, as if I'd found a precious treasure. Yeah, they get harder each verse. So this is the idea of when you're dealing with, say, you know, on a lighter than these words imply, but say someone in your family or someone at work has a negative state of mind all the time. All they do is complain, all they do is see what's wrong with situations, and it's hard for you to be around them because, you know, it's like brings you down. You know, you let their words become your attitude. So seeing them as a precious treasure, what's that about?
We have so much to learn from them.
We have a lot to learn from them. Also, what is it an opportunity for?
Compassion.
Compassion. How terrible it is to have that kind of mind. You know, to rejoice in that you don't have that mind, and then have compassion that they do, because that's a really suffering mind. They must be miserable. Now, do we have to listen? Do people listen to everything their 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old says? Why? Why not?
It's not wise. It's like a
Changes.
Well, and it's not very meaningful, is it? Well, when someone's just complaining and they're, you know, usually repeat themselves, there's no real meaning in there except I'm suffering. That's really all that you can get from that. That's how they view the world. This world makes me miserable. So all you really need to hear is that they're suffering. You know? And how you choose to respond to that, you know, you can come from a place of compassion as opposed to, oh, please shut up. You know? You know, my mind, here's my mind. So, you know, this is, and partly because when you have the mind of please shut up, now who's suffering? You are. That's right. So we need to see how if we're mirroring somebody else's negativity, that's probably not skillful. You know? If we can just kind of go, oh, I am so lucky to not have that habit of mind. I'm so sorry that they do. You know, may they have happiness in the future. May they find a method that works for them to not suffer so much. You know, if you come from that place, then you're not going to let yourself have, you know, to take up their habit energy. Because it's a choice. We don't have to do that. Even if we get in trouble for it. I mean, have you ever been yelled at because you don't get in a bad mood just because your partner's in a bad mood? You know, it's sort of like, hey, can't you why aren't you as upset about this as I am?
Why is this bothering you?
Oh yeah, I hate it when he doesn't hate with me.
Yeah.
I would worry a little less if you would worry a little more.
Well, right. Please take my problem away. But it does mean, you know, we want to be able to tolerate the suffering of others. You know, sometimes just being with someone while they share their difficulty is really a gift. It's quite a generous act. You know, you're being generous with your time, you're being generous with your heart. And it doesn't mean that there aren't circumstances where that's not appropriate, because you're just feeding their habit of just staying in a negative place.
I know someone like that, and I'll sit there and listen to them vent about every evil in the world. And I asked them, why do you watch the news? If it does this to you, turn it off. You know, but some people, they just lash back at you. They don't want to hear any kind of advice. Mm-hmm. They want you to agree with them or shut up. If you say anything on a positive note, they lash out at you. It's kind of odd. They almost want to stay in that state.
Which is a terribly suffering mind. You know, so it's not like, you know, people don't ask for advice. It's probably good not to give it. You know, but it is a curiosity, isn't it? But it's still, it just, we, you know, it's really good too if you can find that common ground. You know, sometimes it's hard to be compassionate. You know, it's like you're kind of going, God, you know, what's there to be compassionate about? So that's why when it's good to remember, well, boy, it wouldn't be fun to think like that. So that's a starting point. But also to remind yourself that you also have conditions that you habitually respond in some suffering way. And you just haven't gotten the handle of not doing that yet. And so it's good to remind yourself, oh yeah, I kind of know what that feels like. It's not, I don't do it in this situation, but I do it in that situation, so that you can have more, you know, really connect with the struggling mind.
It gives you eyes that you don't have.
Exactly. So you can really see it from their eyes, you know, so that it's not, because one of the things we try to do is understand where they're coming from, and we may not be able to. It may just not make any sense to us at all. That doesn't mean they're not suffering. You know?
And sometimes you go really relaxed when they feel understood. Like
Yes.
that will actually stop the litany of complaints.
Yeah, it can really change the energy. It also might not. But at least it stops you from adding some more negativity to the situation. If you don't respond with, you know, some sort of negative thing from your own side, like I shouldn't have to put up with this, you know, and display your aversion, you know, then you've just got two negative energies going on. So that's not particularly helpful to yourself or the other person. But it's just about noticing, and noticing that, you know, like, you really don't have to listen to a litany of complaints. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to understand why they do that. It's more of just understanding, yes, we are a mess, aren't we? Sometimes we just do exactly the opposite of what would make sense. Now, we can't tell someone that. Gee, you know, you'd be a lot happier if you just quit complaining. You know, oh, that's loving and kind and patient, you know, but you know, and it may be true, but we don't know where their suffering is arising from. And we're all like this. We all have situations that we just make worse. You know, so it's about respecting where people are in that moment. Now, it's different from, you know, like being a doormat or feeding into someone's stuff. You know, we don't need to do that. That's not a compassionate thing to do for ourselves or the other person. But just checking our own mind, seeing, you know, how am I contributing to this energy? Then the next verse gets harder. When out of envy others mistreat me with abuse, insults, and the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. Yeah, I mean, that is one of my favorites.
It's really a challenge.
It's really what an opportunity this is. This
Your ego.
Yeah, really. really gets to your ego. Yes. And so that's, if you recognize that you do have some issues with pride, you know, this is one of those things where you can go, oh, wonderful. This is something I really need because I have an issue with pride. So, but also I always think of my stepmom when she first married my dad, and she would, you know, and I would defend her from time to time. And she'd go, please don't do that. This is my marriage. So, but she said, you know, you have to pick your battles. You know, couples disagree. They do, you know. All this, I mean, I grew up in a very insane home. So I had never had a role model who knew what they were doing, you know. So this was new to me, just to watch someone actually have skill in a relationship. And so she would share some of, and not that I learned anything, but it's, you know, but I remember this about, you know, you have to pick your battles, you know, that there are times when it's, you know, if someone, you know, sometimes you can see this, where someone all of a sudden is like one-upping stories or something, where they just feel the need to top you in the next story, you know, and it's okay to let them. It's okay to let them shine. Even if whatever you might be talking to, they may not have the information correct. That it doesn't matter. That if it's so important for them to have something acknowledged about what they know, what, you know, that they are the expert on, sometimes instead of having that stalemate of I'm right, you're right, you know, that kind of thing, that which it gets no one anywhere and everybody feels miserable, to just say, oh, I didn't realize that, and stop the tug of war.
But you know that you have to watch out with your own mind.
All of these you have to watch out
But
with.
especially I think this, depending on, you know, what happened to you before and how strong your mind is. If you grew up, let's say, in a home where somebody was abusive to you or something, you just don't let people, because it may affect you even more than, you know, you have to be strong first.
Yeah, I mean, your therapist might have to help you with this.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, you have to judge,
No,
especially with these things. you
it's
know,
absolutely
all the time,
true. You have
know.
to go at your own pace.
Right.
You know, it's true. All of these things. And these are advanced practices. There's no doubt about it. It just gives you a pause to be able to look at things from a different angle. You know, to kind of go, okay, I see things as problematic as opposed to opportunities. And what can I learn from this? What's in it for me? What lesson can I learn here? Not in a derogatory way. Not like, you know, hey, you're the one who has to learn everything. But just in that sense of that we really do grow from challenges. You know, if we're not familiar with how to respond, if we're not familiar with how to give in certain situations, these are our opportunities to cultivate our good qualities. So that's, you know, so if we look at them as that and come from that angle, they can feel a lot less daunting. Because then it's not so much we have an expectation of ourselves to actually accomplish anything because we don't know what we're doing. We're kind of acknowledging, well, I'm not going to assume I know anything here. So I had a job one time where it was sort of like, it was like my first job out of grad school. And so I really felt kind of like, I'm not too sure I know what I'm doing. It was just, so I had to, you know, and I get defensive when I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And so I get, and that's really not a good condition. It's a perfect condition for being short-tempered or impatient or, you know, because it just lends itself to nervousness. And those are my habits when I'm nervous. But, so I kept having to just tell myself, okay, Now, just take your ego out of this and out of every meeting, every encounter, every sort of like brainstorming of things, you know. And it was really interesting how different the experience was for me from coming from that angle of just going, okay, I want this to be whatever will work best for this organization. So if I take my ego out of this, what would I think, you know? And it was, you know, it was kind of fun, in a surprising way. So we want to learn strategies that fit our habit energy. If we want to change our habit energy, we have to find tools that work with our mind. And the way to do that is to notice what we're thinking. You know, first we have to just see, how do I respond? What is my habit of thought? What assumptions do I make? What preconditions do I bring into it? What expectations do I have? What are my challenges? Where do I suffer? You know, so we can give ourselves the support we need to come from it from a different angle. Because like Mag was saying, there's certain situations that press our buttons. We are wounded people. Everybody is wounded. And so we need to be really sensitive to our wounds in order to be able to take care of others' wounds. You know, it's if we don't take care of our own wounds, we're not going to be able to take care of someone else's.
So when you take a look at that yourself, your conditioned self, and you see how you are prone to react certain ways to certain situations, and that conditioning is deeply entrenched that you're a child, how hard is it to change? I mean, can you change that much of yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I am a completely different person. And you can see how far I came. I still have really quite a long way to go. So it was not a very pretty picture, you know. But it's this recognition that motivation is critical. You know, there's certain areas in my habits that I really haven't touched at all. Because I'm not highly motivated. Like, just watch my sugar habit. You know, I'm just not highly motivated. Now, if I get diabetes, that may change. You know, I might then be highly motivated. But, you know, so it really, that's why I talk a lot about, you have to look at what's in it for you. You know, or do you see areas in your life that are being damaged by your habit energy? You know, and if you want that to change, then, you know, that you might want to put the effort into making that change. That doesn't mean judging yourself is something like you have to change. You know, this is where we need that loving kindness, that, you know, and unconditional friendliness towards ourselves. If we hate ourselves, that becomes an obstacle. Because we see ourselves as a problem that has to go away. And that's not the condition that promotes change. It really is about loving yourself enough to allow things to unfold differently. To say, you know, it's worth it for me to change because it's okay for me to be happy. I don't have to punish myself for the rest of my life for not being good in this situation and that situation. I don't have to pay for the sins of our past. We can just say, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to do my best to try to not do that anymore. And then go from there. You know? But that takes a certain kind of self, you know, respect of just saying that, okay, you can either stay the same, make people really miserable, or you can try to, you know, do something differently. Because we really are very adaptable. But it's hard to do that if we come from a mind of hatred. You know, if we won't forgive ourselves for not being perfect or making mistakes, it's hard to move forward. So what was Rinpoche talking about the other night? Because he talked about that.
Acknowledge, accept, and change.
Yeah, like move forward.
Yes, move forward.
Yeah, so we kind of have to, that's part of that grasping at the past. If we can't be present now, it's hard to move forward. You know? So it's that kind of energy. And this can take, I mean, some things, like you said, if they're really ingrained, they're really hard, you may need help with this. I need help with this. I need these teachings. This is what Refuge is about for me. You know, is relying on someone who seemed to know, have more wisdom than I have, you know, to try to help me. And the thing of it is, the Buddha taught that we all have Buddha nature. We all have the capacity to become enlightened. Because, and the proof of that is our capacity for compassion and love and kindness and patience and generosity. We have proof that we do these things. We have this capacity. The difference between us and enlightened being is that we have obstacles to fulfilling our potential. And those obstacles are our mind, our habits, and our ignorance of how things exist. Yeah.
The thing is, I don't know if it's pertinent because you were saying that we have the potential. I did not understand when he spoke about that 1% that he felt. I did not understand it.
It was really interesting. So Yangtze Rinpoche was saying he really felt that we are already 99% there. And it's just that last 1% that we need to, you know, and that 1% is, you know, I got the impression, you know, that he felt that it was really a lot about self-doubt and, you know, those kinds of things. That it's just ignorance. Well, maybe not.
Right, because, yeah, because we live so much in the past and the future, you know, and if we really just stay present.
Why is staying present so helpful? What is... This is what I talk about when I'm talking about how when we learn to be self-aware, when we start to pay attention to what's going on in our mind, and we develop the habit of it so that pretty much 24/7 we know what's going on in our mind. We may not be doing anything with that information, but we've gotten in the habit of watching. So we kind of know. We're not hiding from ourselves anymore. We kind of can see, oh, there I am, that greedy person. You know, whatever. That gives us the space in every moment to make a different choice. If we're stuck in the past, or just daydreaming about the future, as opposed to planning, I mean, we do have to plan, we miss that choice. And we just let the habit energy push us through it.
And we can make a lot of mistakes, decisions, because if we don't focus on what's in front of us, then, you know, we cannot really attend well, actually, to what's in front of us if our mind is
Yes.
in the past or the future, you know. It's really somewhere else, not...
Yes, and it's like, I mean, we all know it, like when we drive. And all of a sudden we realize we got distracted. In some situation on the road has changed. And we catch ourselves, you know, we realize, oh, I wasn't paying attention, you know. Well, we do that all the time. It's not just when we're driving, you know. And when we're driving, it's very critical because we're in weapons of mass destruction. But our lives are, you know, like, this is how our habit, if we just plow through our lives following our habit energy, nothing changes.
I think that if you have a lot of thoughts of your past, like, it gives you a lot of clouds, you know? And if you're in your present, you're like, your sky is a little bit clearer.
That's right. And so if we look at the mind like like the sky, and that our main mind, our capacity for knowing, you know, the definition of mind in Buddhism is clear and knowing. The mind, that's the function of mind. Is it reflects and it knows what it reflects. And then we have all these different states of mind. Some are very useful, you know, so they're like the white, fluffy, beautiful clouds, you know. But our negative states of mind can obscure us. And our negative states of mind can be attachment, where we're craving something and we're exaggerating the merits of the thing. And Or they can be, our negative states of mind that are exaggerating the negative qualities of something, which is not really a good word. Negative aspects. And so we're not actually seeing something as it is, which is what we often do when we label something a problem. We've changed the whole tone of what is. It's now got a name.
But also it is kind of like, multitasking.
Yeah.
Basically, because let's say you cook a soup, but you think about something that happened in the past, so your brain cannot actually multitask. So it's like you're trying to do two activities at the same time and it's not working. That the soup may get
And this is why
screwed up
mindfulness
or
is such a good training. Just learning how to pay attention to one thing at a time enables us to get good at that so we can speed up. It's like, you don't have to walk very, very slowly for the rest of your life. But if you become attentive, because our minds are very quick, so if we train our mind to pay attention to these different things, so that, when we're like, oh, notice when you're getting irritated, because that can be a condition for anger in the future, in the future moments. We get quick at that, and then we're able to sort of keep up with ourselves, with our minds, because our minds go, we're off and running. So the more we can learn to stay focused and notice, eventually we're quick at it. We're as quick as our mind is. That makes sense. We can keep up because it's your mind watching your mind, so it's just as fast. What slows us down are the distractions. We get pulled here, we get pulled there, we lose that attentiveness to the mind.
And it seems like with worrying, once you're in a worry, you're working within the worry. You're not looking at the worry, like you're carried away.
Yeah,
with it.
then you just are letting that happen energy of worry take over. So you're no longer by watching and having a part of your mind being alert to, oh, I'm worrying again, you could make a choice. You could go, I'm not going to keep following that train of thought. And you may have to do that 1,000 times in the first hour you try to do it. But don't worry about that because it's not going to hold your attention that long. So don't worry. But it's just a matter of we get better at it. And then we notice when it passes and we don't continue to feed it. Because our states of mind are impermanent just like everything else. But this is about, this training is about the reason why we practice meditation, and just even at the beginning of meditations, just trying to bring our awareness to our body sitting here, and then we anchor our mind for a few minutes on the feeling of the breath going in and out of the body, is to help us find our mind to pay attention to that. To, draw us inward instead of into that, instead of following whatever our thoughts about the past or planning for the future. We almost always are living we just miss our life entirely because we're either in the past or the future.
I'm reading this book now called Pristine Mind, and it's Buddhist. And the guy's position is that if we are able to get rid of all labels and all conditioning and get our mind back to its unconditioned state, that is equivalent to nirvana. Would you agree with that?
No, probably not. But it's certainly the method towards that. But it isn't about not thinking. In the West, we often get that teaching, we kind of get this idea that it's about if I just don't think, if I don't judge, if I don't label something good or bad, if I don't, that's not you can suppress a lot of negative states of mind. In a sense, that's what meditation does. If you really have a strong meditative state, you're not being pulled all over the place, and so anger's not arising, impatience not arising, all that stuff. But all you're doing is replacing those states of mind with the calm of a meditative state. But as soon as you get up off that cushion, if you haven't actually countered those states of mind, they will arise again. That's the difference between actually overcoming these habits of mind and just being able to set them aside. And both are necessary. You know, we need to be able to try to be more positive, use more positive habits of mind, you know, and set aside our negative habits of mind, and that will make them arise less often. But we also need to actually cut the foundation for our negative states of mind, and that is our misperception of how things exist. So if we cut our ignorance, then these unskillful habits of mind will not arise at all. And then that's when you get to nirvana. That's liberation. It's not enlightenment, but you're out of this cyclic existence. So the way you do that, I mean, part of that process is recognizing, I mean, simple things, like when you're worried, you're often not, you're making up a story about something that hasn't happened yet. It doesn't exist at all. It's about recognizing that pride and that ego is a self that doesn't exist at all. It's a story we've made up about ourselves. That nothing is that fixed and concrete and permanent. That if we look at our identity, we have this sense of a self that is really inflated. It's this, it's as if, there's this, we were born a certain way and we'll die that same way with just an older body, Instead of recognizing we're just a series of moments, and in every moment we have choice. We're not actually fixed to some agenda. And we just, we label that as me because, we have to communicate with each other, and so words are kind of useful. But that me is not some unchanging, fixed entity that's almost separate from this body and mind. Like, here am I, go ahead, beat up my body, but, that's not me. We have this sense of a self that doesn't actually exist at all. And this is what our ignorance comes from. And it's holding on to that self. This is what pride's all about. This sense of, don't insult me because, my self depends on this identity. We don't want challenges to that. We don't want our body to be harmed. We grasp at this existence. And the Buddha said, actually, this continuum of mind has existed from the beginning and will never end. But how we experience existence depends on how we're thinking.
I can't shake this idea. I've always equated Buddhism and karma to predestination.
That's not because of Hinduism.
But I think about it now, like neuroscience is talking about how free will is an illusion, and that it's not, that we don't have free will. We're all following this.
Buddhism would disagree with that. Because we don't say that the body is the brain. I mean, the mind is the brain, or the central nervous system, or whatever. That the mind is non-physical. That the body and mind are incredibly interdependent and interconnected, but they are not the same thing. So we're not dictated to by our genes or our electrical impulses and da-da-da. They are definitely a factor. But when the body dies, the mind does not die with it. So they're not the same. So that, so it doesn't have this idea of predestination. Karma means that we experience what we created the cause of, and that's a whole other topic. And since we have 9 minutes, we're not going to go through it tonight. But it's this, so it's definitely not predestination. However, we talk a lot about being out of control due to our karma and delusions. And that just means our past habits. So we can't do much about the external results of our past actions. But we can do an awful lot about how we respond to them, and therefore it will have an impact on the future experiences we have. But also, not just that, but our experience right now. So how we experience each moment is up to us. We have choice in that. It just doesn't feel like it. And then we don't have choice of it as long as we're out of control due to our habit energy. So we have to learn how to take control. And that's a process. It's not just like, I'm just going to quit thinking that way. It's about really, it's sort of like, this idea of like, well, we have to look at things from a new set of eyes. So just even looking at the existence from this perspective of like a physicist, like, how does a physicist see the world and see the universe? They don't see it the same way I do, They are their minds are open to all kinds of possibilities that I can't fathom. But I know that it's that this is all just points of view, that we have that our habit of holding on to things as existing the way they appear to us is a problem for us, our minds. It's what becomes an obstacle to us having wisdom. This is why we get upset when we drop our favorite cup and it gets dented, or the top cracks and it doesn't work anymore, because we really hold on to it as if it's permanent. So for a brief moment, because we're adults and not children, we're kind of like, oh no, how did that happen? As if like it's permanent. So we're still like babies looking at our favorite rattle or something, as far as the way the whole universe exists, the way our consciousness exists with respect to that. We have this view that it exists as it appears. We have all sorts of phrases. Seeing is believing. Even though physicists keep telling us that, sorry, but, seeing reflects what your eyeballs are capable of, not what's there. But we don't, there's a part of us, or for some of us anyway, the non-physicists amongst us perhaps, that want to hold on to seeing as believing, because it seems kind of scary, the thought that maybe what we're seeing isn't accurate. So it's all about being able to try to kind of step back and go, okay, let's let go of that. And let's just see what comes from there. It's kind of fun, though. I mean, until it gets creepy. And it's, But it's kind of fun to just step back and go, the way I hold things to exist is faulty. I'd love to be able to imagine how Stephen Hawking saw the world, but I absolutely cannot imagine how he saw the world.
But you can even think about other beings and what you know in comparison to them and how they must see the world. I have 2 cats who are at home, never went out. Their world is my apartment. That's what they think. Okay? There is a huge, big world, but for them, it doesn't. They don't know. They are not
Right.
aware of it.
Well, and this is a large part of what the study of Buddhism tries to get us to be able to get in touch with. You know, every definition of existence has the word consciousness in it. You know, that things exist when a valid mind establishes it. So when there's no mind that establishes it, it's not like it goes out of existence, but for all those consciousnesses, it's as if it did. It has no relevancy. Whereas we grasp tightly onto everything as if it's got to stay this way. Please stay this way. And that inflexibility causes a lot of our mental suffering. Which is why labeling something as a problem is one of our sources of suffering. It's just the way we start off with things. The things that were our baggage that we bring into it. And so if we just start looking at, maybe it's not helpful to label things as a problem. Or to label things as I'll never be able to get used to it. You know, like when our job changes. That resistance to what is part of our suffering. And if we don't go there, you know, if we don't let that rise so forcefully, if we go, I'm just not gonna, you know, okay, so there it is. It's not helping. So I'm just not gonna think about that, and I'm gonna think about something that might be of help. Sometimes it just feels like a lot like brainwashing, but in effect, that's what we've already done to our minds. You know, we've got all these habits of thinking a certain way, and we want to be able to look and go, is it skillful or not skillful? Is it getting me where I want to go, or is it actually an obstacle to where I want to go? Is it making me more negative, more unhappy, or is it an open, spacious attitude that can help me find opportunities? Does that make sense? In true Tibetan style, I never read the last verse. We did read all the others in all the other classes. So I'm going to read it just because. So, undefiled by the stains and the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. And it's a huge verse. It's about superstitions is about our buying into the way things appear as opposed to how they actually exist. The 8 worldly concerns are being caught by the desire for gain, not loss, for pleasure, not pain, for fame, not infamy, for praise, not criticism. Perceiving all phenomena as illusory just means that they aren't illusions, but they're like illusions because they appear in a way that they don't actually exist. And then be released from the bondage of attachment. Here they're using attachment in both directions. Aversion is a type of an attachment. It's an attachment to being separated from what we don't like. So it's about that, you know, it's beyond preference. It's when we then think our happiness depends on either getting more or being able to get away from. So that was the short course. So in 30 seconds.
powerful.
Anyway. All right. Any questions? Short questions? That's so helpful, isn't it?
Yes, actually, sorry. After that, it says the blissful white nectar purifies.
That's part of the
What
practice.
is
That has nothing. Yeah,
So
that's
what is it?
there's a practice that you can use these verses with, and that is not part of what we're talking about tonight. So,
Tender,
Yeah.
Regarding that, you had mentioned with the Rinpoche, talked about the Refuge and bodhicitta, the prayer or phrases. Are you going to talk about that on Sunday?
Oh, how to use dedicate, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, if I listen to it again, I need to find it on YouTube. I tried to find it earlier today and didn't succeed. So the next Discovering Buddhism module is on the spiritual teacher. And it's usually it's like the third or fourth, I think. Usually. Because in the text on the steps on the path, spiritual teacher is considered one of the roots of the path. And it just means the teachings, really. And so I was reading one of the explanations of it earlier today, and it's sort of like the external guru is like our teachers and our books and the Dalai Lama and our YouTube things and all, our access to someone teaching us. Our internal teacher is our understanding. It's as we learn, and that's where we, eventually that's our inner refuge, because it's when we go for refuge, we're not just going for refuge to those who have gone before us and have succeeded on the path, but we're also going for refuge in our own capacity to become that way. So the internal guru is the that's the actual refuge. But to get there, we need the teachings, and so we rely on someone who understands the path better than we do. And actually, there are all sorts of qualifications. So people like His Holiness the Dalai Lama meet those qualifications, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. But this is something that takes years to investigate. It's not something, some people have a karmic connection. They meet their teacher from their previous life and this life, and they just know it right away. They meet them and, the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. I'm not one of those people. But many people are, very fortunately. They meet their teachers again, and it's, they just keep going on their path. So it's kind of cool. But they recommend that you take 12 years to investigate a teacher, and that you don't live too close to them, because then you start focusing on their faults instead of their good qualities. It's really very fun. So, but we're only going to spend like 3 weeks on it, I think, because Venerable Rabina will be here, and then we'll talk about emptiness following that. So, and then we start the whole thing over after Tantra. So in September we start again with Mind and Its Potential. So, anyway. Is that what?
Oh, I just want to say about questions, now that we have our question jar back here, the glass jar, if anybody has any questions, I know Karen you mentioned before, and John, it's good to just write your question down on a piece of paper and put it in there, and then we'll talk about it in a Sunday class.
If it's appropriate to the Sunday class. If it's appropriate to this class, it'll be in this class. And if you want to make sure you hear the answer, then you might want to put your name. Because if you're not here, because that happens all the time. So that's karma for you. So, yeah.
And then also, we are here open on Sunday, Easter, and we're having lunch if you're interested in coming after class.
We're not having lunch. We're encouraging you to bring your lunch and sticking around to get to know each other. And also, and I'm happy that we're going to try to start the habit of having a newcomers orientation on the first Sundays, so that people can just kind of have random questions, like about all the colors in here or whatever. We'll try to address those.
And then also about the YouTube channel, because we did upload them, right?
Sure.
And are you subscribed? Do you subscribe?
Yes.
So, okay, I need to subscribe too. So please, for more information about our YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel.
You just have to go on your YouTube account and put it into Dunkanka.
I didn't get it. That's what I'm saying. I did this today. I do know how to use it. I just had no luck. So.
And that's all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Hopefully see
So
you.
we want to dedicate because it's a good thing to do. And we'll discuss more of that on Sunday. We'll go into that practice. So. What dedications is about is taking the positive energy that we may have created during this activity, and that, according to the teachings, will result in positive resources in the future, and we want to share them with others. So on 246, we'll stick with the basics. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled when a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world.